Before Kenneth Iwamasa is sentenced, Matthew Perry's family is asking the court to look beyond a simple plea agreement and focus on a deeper betrayal. The person who was trusted to help protect Perry became one of the people tied directly to the drugs that killed him. On October 28, 2023, Matthew Perry was found unresponsive at his Pacific Palisades residence. He was 54 years old. The Los Angeles County Medical Examiner later determined that Perry died from the acute effects of ketamine, with contributing factors including drowning, coronary artery disease, and the effects of buprenorphine. The manner of death was ruled an accident, but the legal story did not end with the medical examiner's ruling. Months later, federal investigators said Perry's death was connected to an illegal ketamine distribution network that included doctors, a supplier, a middleman, and Perry's own live-in assistant. The central figure in this latest court update is Kenneth Iwamasa. Federal prosecutors say he was Perry's live-in personal assistant, a person close enough to Perry that the family believed he had a responsibility to help keep him safe. But according to the Department of Justice, Iwamasa admitted that he repeatedly injected Perry with ketamine even though he had no medical training. That admission became one of the most important points in the federal case. Iwamasa pleaded guilty in August 2024 to one count of conspiracy to distribute ketamine causing death. Prosecutors said he conspired with others to illegally obtain ketamine and distribute it to Perry. They also said he performed multiple injections on Perry on the day Perry died. The broader case involved 5 defendants. The Department of Justice identified Jasveen Sangha, Salvador Plasencia, Eric Fleming, Mark Chavez, and Kenneth Iwamasa as part of the investigation. Federal authorities said the case showed how Perry moved from supervised treatment into a dangerous illegal supply chain. Investigators said Perry had been receiving ketamine legally in a medical setting, but prosecutors alleged that the later supply was outside legitimate treatment. According to court records described by the Justice Department, Dr. Salvador Plasencia sold ketamine despite knowing Perry had a documented history of addiction and that the drug was being administered by a personal assistant without medical supervision. The case then shifted toward another source. Prosecutors said Jasveen Sangha and Eric Fleming sold ketamine that was provided to Iwamasa. In April 2026, Sangha was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to charges that included distribution of ketamine resulting in death or serious bodily injury. Fleming was later sentenced to 2 years in prison for his role in supplying ketamine. Other defendants had already received sentences. Plasencia was sentenced to 30 months in prison after pleading guilty to ketamine distribution counts. Mark Chavez, another doctor connected to the supply chain, received probation, home detention, and community service after pleading guilty to conspiracy to distribute ketamine. That leaves Iwamasa as the final sentencing step in the public timeline. His sentencing is scheduled for May 27, 2026. Prosecutors are recommending 41 months in prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. He faces a statutory maximum of up to 15 years. The victim impact statements filed before sentencing give the court a view of the family's position. Perry's mother, Suzanne Morrison, and his sisters, Caitlin and Madeline Morrison, described their grief, anger, and sense of betrayal. They said the family had trusted Iwamasa, and that learning the government's version of events forced them to relive Perry's death in a different and more painful way. Their statements also focus on what happened after Perry died. Public reporting on the filing says family members accused Iwamasa of misleading them in the days after Perry's death and remaining close to the family, while his own role was still not publicly known. Those claims are part of the emotional context a judge may consider at sentencing, but the legal issue remains the guilty plea and the conduct admitted in court. Iwamasa's defense has taken a different position. His attorneys argued in pre-sentencing filings that he was an employee caught in a damaging relationship dynamic with his employer, and that he struggled to say no. That argument does not erase the guilty plea, but it is part of what the defense wants the court to weigh when deciding the sentence. This is where the case becomes more complicated than a single headline. Prosecutors argue that Iwamasa had a unique position of trust and direct access to Perry. The defense argues that he was not the main supplier, and that he cooperated early with investigators. The judge must weigh both the harm described by the family and the cooperation prosecutors say helped build the case against others. From an investigative standpoint, the Iwamasa sentencing matters because it closes the circle around the person physically closest to Perry during the final weeks of his life. Sanga's sentence addressed the supplier side. Fleming's sentence addressed the middleman role. The doctor's sentences addressed the medical access side. Iwamasa's hearing addresses the assistant who, according to his own guilty plea and federal prosecutors, administered the drug without medical training. The unanswered question is not whether Iwamasa pleaded guilty. He did. The question now is what punishment the court believes reflects his role, his cooperation, the family's loss, and the broader illegal distribution network that surrounded Perry before his death. As of this recording, Kenneth Iwamasa has pleaded guilty and is awaiting sentencing. The hearing is expected to determine whether the court follows the government's recommendation, imposes a different term, or gives added weight to the victim impact statements now before the judge. Another important part of this story is the gap between legal responsibility and personal trust. In many federal drug cases, prosecutors focus on the supply chain: who obtained the substance, who sold it, who moved money, and who delivered it. But in this case, Iwamasa's role was different because he was not just another person in the chain. He lived in Perry's home, worked closely with him, and had access to his private life in a way most defendants did not. That is why the family's statements matter in the sentencing phase. A victim impact statement does not decide guilt. That has already been addressed through the guilty plea. Instead, it gives the court a fuller picture of the harm caused by the offense. For Perry's family, the issue was not only that Iwamasa admitted to injecting him with ketamine, it was that according to their statements, they believed he was someone who should have been helping Perry stay safe. The court also has to look at the broader circumstances. Prosecutors say Iwamasa cooperated with investigators, and cooperation can affect sentencing because it may help federal authorities build cases against others. But cooperation does not erase the conduct itself. That is the balance judges often face in federal sentencing, weighing assistance to the government against the seriousness of the admitted offense, the defendant's role, and the impact on victims and their families. There is also a public interest question at the center of the case. Matthew Perry had spoken openly during his life about addiction and recovery. That history made the details of the federal case especially painful for many people who followed his career. But the courtroom issue is narrower than Perry's public image. It is about whether the people around him followed the law, whether controlled substances were distributed outside proper medical supervision, and whether those decisions contributed to his death. By the time Iwamasa walks into court for sentencing, the judge will already have a record filled with guilty pleas, sentencing memos, family statements, and the government's recommendation. The hearing is not a trial. It is the moment when the court decides what sentence fits the admitted conduct. And for Perry's family, it is also one of the final public moments in a case that has turned a private loss into a federal criminal proceeding. Thank you for watching and supporting the Courtroom.